Okay, off we go. So the salacious title of this is Configuration Management is Old and Boring. It's also a longer talk about lessons learned from configuration management. So I work at Chef, and we hear that configuration management, like, people don't need it anymore. So a little bit about where we came from. In the beginning, we had big, expensive machines and wizard-like operators. And in the past couple of years, I've heard people be sad that these days are gone, which I find very silly. And now, machines are super cheap. Everybody can just spin something up somewhere, rent it by the quarter hour. And what we found is, what Gibson says, right? The future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. And there's a subtext of distributed systems joke in that. So the complexity moved from one big machine that cost a lot of money and therefore felt like it had a lot of importance attached to it, to lots of small machines where the complexity and the knowledge part ends up being the topology. In the waterfall to agile area, it's great for software developers, Agile Manifesto, you got to ship it and forget it, put it on a CD-ROM, and then it's somebody else's problem from there on out, and sort of ignored what happens after you load up the CD-ROM. In the early cloud, we had things like VMs, hardware on demand, changed the need for what we now sort of consider as configuration management. I was a sysadmin for a big Web 2.0 shop, and we had the larger and larger environments. After that, we have our DevOps era. We heard about in the first talk this morning, the sort of watershed moment in 2009, where all of a sudden there's all this stuff going on. Everybody wants to ship stuff all the time, and it has to be part of a long-term life cycle. And so where are we going next? We've got new practices, but we still rely on these stable foundations that we had to build in the last era. We have to have environments that match, and we're infringing a bit more on what were traditionally in larger places, sort of things like release management and stuff like that. So the biggest complaint we hear from organizations we work with is that their environments don't match, and they've got development and testing and production, and none of them look the same. And that's a good place for us to get started with things like configuration management. When you're in sort of this new world of always shipping and always moving forward and putting a lot of code out, that means automating as much as possible and building this automation mindset into all the pieces of your workflow. So we're trying to get to market faster. It requires as much culture work as it does tools. There's a lot of that in sort of the DevOps space. You'll hear a lot more about culture than you do in other technical conferences. And it gets into all parts of your pipeline. And the reliability and repeatability of all your platforms ends up being key. We've seen more migration away from GUI-based tools. They become part of the sort of end-user experience for reporting and things like that, but not so much as part of the actual workflow. So configuration management is still there to help you go fast, building new hosts that meet your requirements, deploying your code as often as necessary, and sort of helping you build that stable substrate for all of the things that you need going forward. It also helps us to make failing okay. When I have a release that goes bad or the product doesn't do what it needs to, I can just sort of refresh everything and spin the wheel again and hope that it works the next time. So moving forward into things like containers, there's still a lot of early life cycle, fast development. There's an arms race of tools in the container space right now. You'd have to print it out on the big white plotter to see everything. So the ecosystem there is still evolving as far as how we manage monitoring and logs and all that stuff. But we know that everything is faster. All the old eras had longer enterprise buying cycles, 5-year plans, all these things. And even though a technology executive might not stick around for 5 years, they still have sort of these long-term plans. So there's still lots of challenges, and we have sort of short-term outlooks and long-term outlooks, and 5 years, of course, is an eternity for the internet. 5 years ago was it feels like ancient history. But we do know that the long tail is long. We, as configuration management people, are still working with mainstream adopters, and eventually there'll be doubters. There's still parts of the market that aren't even looking at configuration management yet, and they're still sort of high risk and conservative in that space. So we're still here to help. Things like infrastructure as code, helping folks with continuous deployment, making sure all those target environments work together as much as possible, and they all look the same, and help you get to the end. And we are Chef, and if you'd like to talk more about why configuration management is boring, we'd be happy to help you with that.